In 2016, I walked into an elementary school in Saskatoon's inner city, a school where most of the children came from lower socioeconomic status families, children who were impacted by poverty and who likely experienced many of the social conditions that are often linked to poverty, including interactions with police. In addition, due to Canada's colonial past and the ongoing impacts that colonialism continues to have, this school had a large population of First Nation and Métis students. At the time, I was working as a school resource officer, which is a police officer assigned to various schools, and I had been one for several years. And although I had been to the school many times before, this particular day in 2016 was different. When I walked in, I was barely through the door when the staff excitedly told me there was a surprise near the gym. I wouldn't say police officers typically love surprises, but they assured me that this was something I was going to want to see. When they led me around the corner, the staff told me that the older grades had completed self-portraits about who they wanted to be when they grew up. Not surprisingly, close to half of them said YouTuber. But what was surprising was that the other half said that they wanted to become a police officer. And I thought, okay, wow, this is interesting. These are kids who I would expect to have had more negative interactions with police in their lifetime than most kids their age. They were kids whose families may be experiencing generational trauma, including trauma associated with interactions with law enforcement due to a long history of colonialism, legislated control, and systemic inequities. So what was different about this particular school? Why were so many First Nation and Métis students wanting to become police officers, despite all of this? As I stood there, looking at all of these children's drawings of themselves in uniform, one of the staff members quietly leaned over to me as if she knew what I had been debating in my head, and she said, "This is because of you." Well, uniform or not, tears streamed down my face. I remember looking at those drawings and the names written on them and being surprised to see that some of the kids who I didn't think I was connecting with still saw themselves as future police officers. I took a photo of one of those drawings to remind me of what's possible. This picture was drawn by one of the kids who I didn't think I had made an impact on. And as you can see, she very clearly stated, "It's me, brah." As if it was affirming to me that yes, even she hoped to one day wear a uniform. This drawing was a reminder that as first responders, we often do not get to close the feedback loop on the impact that we have. We have to trust that showing empathy, compassion, kindness, and respect can leave a positive impression, even in the most challenging of situations. An impression where a kid living within the challenges of their environment can still see themselves in you, see themselves becoming you. About 7 years later, I completed a master's in organizational leadership. I chose to do an applied project focused on assessing municipal police officers' knowledge of Indigenous history and the educational requirements needed to fill in the gaps. I wanted to know what the baseline knowledge was for officers in a few critical areas, such as the treaties, residential schools, and the 60s scoop. And more importantly, I wanted to know how we could better prepare officers to have all of the information when working with Indigenous people and communities. As police officers, when we're responding to calls, we generally want to gather as much background information as possible before attending a call. We want to know what we're walking into. We're trained to look up the history of the residents, ask about any known weapons, court orders, occupants, who the complainant is, and what they might want or need from us. But what my master's project told me was that we were sending officers into situations and communities missing pieces of the story, really important pieces. For example, when we think about providing trauma-informed, compassionate responses during difficult situations, it is significant to understand issues like the mistrust of police, impacts of generational trauma, and impacts of being disconnected from your culture, language, and family. This information adds important context to every situation that we encounter with Indigenous people. And it's also where I come in. I'm the granddaughter of a residential school survivor, the daughter of a 60s scoop survivor, and a woman impacted by generational trauma, loss of language, and culture. And now, I'm a doctoral student in educational leadership at the University of Saskatchewan, and I've been a police officer in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan for the past 2 decades. It's a unique position, one that I don't take lightly, and it's one that I recognize has a unique lens in working towards reconciling a historically broken and currently challenged relationship between the police and Indigenous people and communities. This is me at a powwow here in Saskatoon with my friend and fellow classmate in my doctoral program. After being encouraged by the Saskatoon Police Service to use my experience, position, and education to bring to life my vision of a comprehensive 5-day, 40-hour course that includes ceremony, knowledge keepers, elders, lived experience, and history from both the police and Indigenous lens, a course that I believe is leading the country in Indigenous cultural competency education for police recruits. I realized that the impact that I made in that school all of those years ago was data that I could draw on. Data that told me that operating with a trauma-informed lens as someone who understands history and displays compassion and empathy, I was able to leave a positive impression despite responding to calls and working through difficult situations. And even better, as I pursue my doctoral research, this is something that I believe we can teach new police recruits across the country, and that we have a duty to do so. Exploring the edges means daring to move beyond traditional law enforcement training so that we are equipping officers with all of the information while beginning to truly engage in reconciliation in a way that honors the truth first. Imagine a Canada where we trained every public servant, not just to be proficient with their tools and the law, but to understand the land, the history, and the people they serve. What if police education included national standards embedded with decolonization, restorative justice principles, and trauma-informed practices, not as optional, different from agency to agency or province to province, but as essential, a requirement of all of us, a mandate, a commitment. I don't think systemic transformation of our justice system can happen through sweeping declarations, strategic plans, or even recruiting initiatives. It happens in the small moments where one compassionate decision changes a life, where one trauma-informed conversation shifts a perspective, where one relationship built on trust can reshape a community. I believe that establishing national standards is not only an act of educational reform, but an act of reconciliation. It's a step that can equip officers with the knowledge and skills necessary to begin to reduce the over-incarceration of Indigenous peoples, foster safer, healthier communities, and affirm the rights, histories, and lived experiences of Indigenous peoples across the country. And when paired with policy reform, Indigenous-led oversight, restorative justice practices, they can catalyze meaningful systemic change. We are standing at the edge of a choice. On one side, the well-worn path of how it's always been done within our justice system, and the other is uncharted, demanding curiosity, humility, and the courage to listen, learn, and unlearn. To the government officials, policymakers, police leaders, and public safety personnel, it's time to demand better. It's time to commit to educating our public servants to effectively respond to the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, and the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit People calls for justice. It's time to enable restorative practices and trauma-informed approaches to create a society where more kids from marginalized populations want to grow up to be police officers because we have shown them deep relational kindness and respect, and we understand their history. It's time to create an environment for police officers to do their best work because they have all of the information. And this needs to start from the first day in a police uniform. As an academic, a police officer, and a First Nations woman, I believe that when education becomes systemic, reconciliation becomes sustainable. As the late Murray Sinclair stated in guiding the TRC's final report, education got us into this mess, and education will get us out.